Everyone is talking about Iranian missiles and drone attacks. Nobody is talking about what an American submarine did in the Indian Ocean. That hasn't happened since the last day of World War II. And nobody is talking about what Iran did in response and why the Pentagon went completely silent. Let me start with what we know for certain. March 4th, 2026, the Indian Ocean, off the coast of Sri Lanka, an American Los Angeles-class submarine, USS Charlotte, fired two Mark 48 torpedoes at an Iranian Navy frigate. One torpedo hit. The ship IRIS Dena sank in 2 to 3 minutes. At least 87 Iranian sailors were killed. 32 were rescued by the Sri Lankan Navy. The rest remain missing. This was the first time an American submarine torpedoed and sank an enemy vessel since August 14, 1945, the last day of World War II. Let me be very clear. 80 years. That is how long it had been, and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth chose two words to describe it: quiet death. Pay attention to this. Those two words were not accidental. In 30 years of reading intelligence briefings, I have learned that the words officials choose, especially in moments of historic significance, are chosen very carefully. Quiet death. That is not the language of a routine military operation. That is a message, delivered deliberately, to multiple audiences simultaneously. Now let me tell you who the IRIS Dena actually was, because this detail matters enormously, and it is being glossed over in most Western coverage. The IRIS Dena was not a warship on a combat mission. It was an Iranian Navy frigate, returning home from peacetime naval exercises hosted by India. The International Fleet Review 2026, a multilateral exercise held at Visakhapatnam on India's eastern coast. The crew had participated in the exercises from February 15th to February 25th. They had visited the Taj Mahal. They had participated in a city parade. They had embarked on cultural visits across India. On February 26th, the Iranian embassy in Sri Lanka requested a goodwill port visit for the Dena and two other ships, starting March 9th. The ship was heading home. It was returning from peacetime exercises. It was operating under protocols that required it to be unarmed or lightly armed because of the nature of the exercises it had just completed. The United States, which had also attended those same exercises, knew this. Here's what they're not telling you. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command rejected claims that the Dena was unarmed, but the Iranian foreign minister responded in plain language. Frigate Dena, a guest of India's Navy carrying almost 130 sailors, was struck in international waters without warning. Without warning. A vessel returning from exercises your own forces had attended. Struck without warning. I'm not asking you to take Iran's side. I'm asking you to understand what that decision communicates to every Navy in the world about what safe in international waters now means. Let's talk about the geography, because this is the strategic detail that changes everything. The IRIS Dena was not in the Persian Gulf, not near Iranian waters, not in any recognized war zone. It was sunk approximately 19 nautical miles off the coast of Gala, Sri Lanka. That is 3,000 kilometers from the Persian Gulf. 1,000 kilometers. Think about what that means. The former Indian Navy chief, Arun Prakash, said it directly. So far, we had assumed the conflict was confined to the Persian Gulf, but when the ship was sunk off the coast of Sri Lanka, the implication was that there are chances of the conflict spreading. Then he added something that nobody in Washington wanted to hear. Perhaps it was also a message to India and others. After all, the ship was no direct threat to the U.S. That the U.S. has extensive reach and can strike wherever it wants. Pay attention to this. A retired Indian Navy chief, a man who spent decades building naval strategy, described the sinking of the IRIS Dena as a message, not a military necessity, a message. Now let's talk about India, because what happened to India in this moment is a story in itself. India's Prime Minister had stood before his Navy in late October and declared, "The Indian Navy is the guardian of the Indian Ocean." Loud chants of "Long live Mother India" from the audience. Less than 5 months later, the United States sank a ship that India had just hosted as a guest in exercises on India's own coast, in India's own maritime neighborhood, without informing India, without coordinating with India, without asking anyone's permission. India did not issue a formal statement for more than 24 hours. See, Uday Bhaskar, a retired Indian Navy officer and director of the Society for Policy Studies, called it a strategic embarrassment for India. He said India's moral standing takes a beating because of the Indian government's near silence. Another analyst named Joshi put it even more bluntly. When push comes to shove, the U.S. does what it feels like. Even in the Indian Ocean, it operates as it wants. Here's what they're not telling you. The United States and India have been cultivating a defense partnership for years. The AUKUS partnership, the Quad, billions in defense cooperation. And when the moment came, Washington sank a ship in India's backyard without a phone call. I've seen this pattern before. When a superpower acts unilaterally in another nation's sphere of influence, that nation has to make a choice: stand up or step back. India stepped back. And that tells you something very important about the real balance of power in this conflict. Now let's talk about what happened next. Because Iran did not stay quiet, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued an official statement, the 19th official statement under what Iran is calling Operation True Promise 4. Iran claimed it struck a United States Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating in the Indian Ocean, approximately 600 kilometers from the Iranian coastline. The strike, Iran said, involved a combination of Qatar 380 ballistic missiles and Talayeh cruise missiles. Fires on board, widespread fires, on both the destroyer and an accompanying supply vessel. The supply vessel was reportedly carrying approximately 160,000 barrels of fuel. Financial value of the assets reportedly struck, exceeding $2.5 billion, and then the Pentagon went silent. Here's what they're not telling you. When Iranian missile attacks miss or cause minimal damage, American military spokespersons are rapid, detailed, and public in their statements. When the response is silence, careful message management, evaluation in progress. I've seen this pattern before. In 30 years of reading intelligence, silence from people with something to hide sounds very different from silence from people with nothing to say. Pay attention to this. I am not telling you the Iranian claim is confirmed. I am telling you the silence is notable. And notable silence, in my experience, usually means something happened. Let me explain exactly what Iran claims it did and why the tactical details matter. The Qatar 380 is a medium-range ballistic missile, range up to 2,000 kilometers, liquid fuel, capable of maneuvering during its re-entry phase. What that means in plain English is that in the final seconds of its approach to a target, it is traveling at hypersonic velocity while actively changing its flight path. Current interceptor technology is designed to intercept targets moving at certain speed profiles. Hypersonic terminal velocities compress the reaction time available to defensive systems, to the point where the probability of successful interception drops significantly. Now combine that with the Talayeh cruise missile. The Talayeh flies at extremely low altitude, essentially hugging the surface of the water, specifically designed to fly beneath radar coverage. Smart missile can change targets mid-mission. What Iran appears to have done, according to their account, is coordinate both systems simultaneously. Ballistic missiles coming from directly above at hypersonic speed, cruise missiles coming in low from a different angle at the same moment. Two completely different threat profiles, two completely different response requirements at exactly the same time. The objective, you overwhelm the ship's defensive system by forcing them to deal with threats that require fundamentally different interception solutions simultaneously. That is not improvisation. That is a professionally planned anti-ship operation. Now let's talk about the target, because understanding what an Arleigh Burke destroyer actually is makes what Iran is claiming truly significant. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is the backbone of the United States Navy, 55 meters long, displacing over 9,500 tons, crew of more than 300 personnel, cost approximately $2 billion per ship. These destroyers carry the Aegis combat system, the most advanced electronic defense shield ever put on a surface warship, simultaneously tracks hundreds of targets within a 300-kilometer radius. They carry 90 vertical launch cells, standard missiles for aerial defense, Tomahawk cruise missiles for land strikes, anti-submarine rockets, and they carry close-in weapon systems, capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute, specifically to destroy incoming missiles at point-blank range. This is important. The Arleigh Burke destroyer was designed precisely To defend against the kind of attack Iran says it just successfully executed. If Iranian missiles penetrated those defenses, that is not a minor tactical note. That is a statement about where missile technology currently stands relative to naval defense systems, and that statement has consequences for every American naval commander in every ocean on the planet. Let me now explain why Iran chose to call this Operation True Promise 4. The three previous iterations of Operation True Promise targeted Israeli assets. This fourth operation has now explicitly targeted American naval assets. That escalation in targeting is a deliberate choice, a deliberate signal. Iran is saying clearly, we view the United States and Israel as joint combatants, deserving joint retaliation, not separate actors where one might be deterred while the other continues. The IRGC framed this strike as retaliation for the joint American and Israeli attacks on Tehran and other Iranian cities. The language of reciprocity is deliberate. For every strike on Iranian soil, there is now a declared Iranian intention to respond against American assets, wherever they can be reached. Pay attention to this, that phrase, wherever they can be reached. 100 kilometers into the Indian Ocean is a long way from Iran's coastline. If American naval assets can be struck at that range, every ship positioning decision, every refueling schedule, every patrol route in the entire theater has to be recalculated. There is one more layer to this that connects everything together. Iran entered this war already under severe economic pressure, decades of sanctions, maximum economic punishment already applied. An adversary that feels it has nothing left to lose economically calculates risk and reward differently than a state that still has economic assets to protect. When you strip a country of all its economic leverage, its military leverage becomes proportionally more central to everything it does. Iran is not fighting to win a conventional war. Iran is fighting to make the cost of continuing this conflict high enough, unpredictable enough, and psychologically unbearable enough that the calculation in Washington changes. And here is what that means for you. Oil prices were already at historically elevated levels before today. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed to Western shipping. Tankers are sitting at anchor outside the Gulf, waiting. If this escalation ladder continues to be climbed, if Iran responds to the sinking of the Dena, if the U.S. responds to that response, we are looking at sustained oil prices that filter through every transportation cost, every manufacturing input, every food distribution chain on the planet, gas prices at American pumps, grocery prices, heating costs this winter, everything that moves from one place to another. The International Maritime Organization has documented the attacks on shipping. The insurance markets have already responded. Lloyd's of London pulled war risk coverage for Gulf transit entirely, and midterm elections are approaching. An administration conducting a costly war, directly correlated with rising costs at the pump, faces a very specific political pressure that economic abstractions do not capture. Here is where we stand right now. The United States Navy sank an Iranian frigate in the Indian Ocean for the first time since World War II. 87 sailors killed, 32 rescued, the rest missing. Iran claims it struck back against an American destroyer using hypersonic ballistic missiles and low-altitude cruise missiles in a coordinated saturation attack. Time to exploit a window of reduced maneuverability during refueling. The Pentagon went silent. India was humiliated in its own maritime backyard and said nothing for 24 hours. China is watching its Indian Ocean oil supply lines and calculating. The war has left the Persian Gulf. It is now in the Indian Ocean. And the question every American naval commander is asking right now is the same question every tanker captain was already asking about the Strait of Hormuz. Is the next meter of water safe, or isn't it? Nobody can answer that with certainty, and that uncertainty is the weapon. Here is what this means for you, for every American, right now. An American submarine just sank an Iranian warship for the first time since World War II, 3,000 kilometers from the Persian Gulf. Iran claims it struck back, and the Pentagon went silent. India was humiliated in its own backyard. The Indian Ocean is now a theater of this war, and every ship, Every tanker, every naval vessel in that ocean is now operating under a new reality, one where the rules of engagement have changed, where hypersonic missiles can be fired from 600 kilometers away, and where the most sophisticated naval defense systems in the world may not be enough. You feel that reality every time you fill your tank. You will feel it in your grocery bill. You will feel it in everything that moves from one place to another. This war is not contained. It never was. And the people running it on both sides are betting you won't notice until it's too late. So I want to ask you directly, do you think the Pentagon's silence about the Iranian destroyer claim means something actually happened? Or is this Iranian propaganda designed to make them look stronger than they are after losing the IRIS Dena? Tell me what you think. I read every single comment. If you want to understand what's coming next, subscribe. Because in my next video, I'm going to show you what happens when China decides its Indian Ocean oil supply lines are no longer safe, and how that single decision could change this entire war overnight. And trust me, you need to see it.